Melania Trump faced a tough, condescending interviewer and turning the entire conversation around with nothing but calm, quiet strength. If you've ever felt underestimated or talked down to, this story will inspire you. The grand auditorium at Columbia University was packed, its high ceilings echoing with the soft murmur of anticipation. Rows of students, professors, journalists, and invited guests filled every seat, their eyes fixed on the stage where two chairs sat under bright white lights, flanked by cameras ready to stream the event to thousands online. The atmosphere was formal yet charged, as this wasn't just another university lecture. This was a widely publicized town hall event, and tonight's guest was Melania Trump, First Lady of the United States. The university's elite had turned out in force, some curious, others critical, and many expecting a clash. Social media was already buzzing with hashtags like Melania Town Hall trending as people waited to see how she would handle the evening's host, Dr. James Holloway, a professor known for his sharp critiques and tough questions. Whispers circulated among the crowd about whether Melania would hold her own or be cornered. The polished wood stage, the backdrop of tall university banners, and the low hum of tech teams adjusting cameras all created a sense of carefully staged expectation. Yet beneath the academic setting there was a palpable sense that something more than an ordinary interview was about to unfold. When Melania Trump took the stage, her presence was as striking as it was composed. Dressed in a sleek, tailored suit, she carried herself with the quiet elegance that had defined her public image, calm, measured, and unreadable. As she sat gracefully in one of the chairs under the bright lights, her posture straight and her hands gently folded in her lap, the audience watched her carefully, some with skepticism, others with curiosity. Across from her sat Dr. James Holloway, one of the university's most respected and controversial political science professors. Known for his sharp intellect and reputation as a relentless interviewer, Holloway had built his name on challenging high-profile figures and exposing what he viewed as political double-talk. Tonight, he seemed ready to do the same with Melania, confident in his ability to steer the conversation and control the narrative. As he adjusted his microphone and glanced at his notes, a faint smirk played at the corner of his mouth, signaling that he was preparing to corner her, as he had done with so many guests before. Holloway had the crowd's attention. He was the intellectual warrior, and she was expected to be the silent figure in the chair opposite him. But as Melania glanced calmly at him, her expression unreadable, there was something in her quiet gaze that suggested she might not play along so easily. As the moderator gave a brief introduction and stepped aside, Dr. Holloway leaned forward, microphone in hand, his tone smooth and casual as he began. "Mrs. Trump, thank you for joining us tonight," he said, flashing a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's start simple. During the time that you left the White House, what did you focus on? How did life change for you?" It was a question designed to seem harmless, but there was an edge to it, as if implying that her relevance had faded. Melania smiled softly, her expression poised. "I focus on my family, my initiatives, and work that has meaning," she answered in her calm, accented voice, offering nothing more than necessary but enough to answer the question. Holloway, not satisfied, tried to probe further, pushing her to elaborate. "Your Be Best campaign received a lot of criticism. Do you think you left a lasting impact?" he asked, his eyebrows raised, daring her to defend it. Again, Melania stayed composed. "I believe that helping children, promoting kindness, and supporting families is never wasted effort," she replied. Her tone was firm but not defensive. As the questions continued about public life, politics, and her time as First Lady, Melania maintained her steady, polite distance, offering answers that were thoughtful but careful. Though Holloway's questions grew sharper, Melania never appeared rattled. Her responses were measured, focused on the issues, not the drama Holloway seemed eager to spark. Yet even as she remained calm, the audience could sense the tension building, as though both knew this polite opening exchange was only a warm-up for what was really coming. Holloway leaned back, watching her closely, waiting for the moment to strike harder, but Melania showed no cracks. As the polite back and forth continued, Dr. Holloway's tone began to shift, growing sharper and more pointed. The casual smiles faded, replaced with a cool, analytical edge. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, fingers steepled as he stared directly at Melania. "Let's be honest," he said, his voice taking on a more condescending tone. "Many people would argue that during your time as First Lady you were, well, largely invisible." A murmur rippled through the audience, some leaning in, others bristling at the bluntness. "You weren't as engaged, at least not publicly, as some of your predecessors. Eleanor Roosevelt, Michelle Obama, even Hillary Clinton. Do you think that's fair?" Holloway let the question hang, his smirk returning, clearly expecting to catch her off guard. Before Melania could answer, he pushed further. "I mean, let's be real. When people think of first ladies, they think of active, vocal women who shape the political conversation. But you seemed to stay in the background. Was that a choice, or were you simply sidelined?" The words were sharp, carefully wrapped as a question but clearly an accusation, framing her as passive, irrelevant. Some in the audience chuckled nervously, sensing Holloway's attempt to corner her, to force her into defensiveness. Yet Melania sat still, her hands folded gracefully in her lap, expression unreadable. She didn't rush to answer, and her silence seemed to unsettle Holloway, who clearly expected a stumble. The tension in the room thickened, and for the first time, it became unclear who was really in control, the interviewer or the guest. Melania waited a moment, letting the silence settle like a weight between them. Then, with her usual calm, she leaned slightly forward, her hands still delicately folded in her lap. "You say I was invisible," she began softly, her voice steady, "but perhaps it is because you chose not to see." The room grew still, the audience caught off guard by the sharpness hidden beneath her gentle tone. She continued, her gaze fixed on Holloway. "Not every role requires shouting to make a difference. I have visited children in hospitals, met with victims of crises, and worked on initiatives to promote kindness and well-being, even when the cameras were not there." Her words were measured, but they carried quiet strength, challenging his assumptions without ever raising her voice. "Visibility does not equal value," she added, her eyes never leaving Holloway's. "Sometimes the most important work is done quietly." A few murmurs of agreement moved through the crowd, while Holloway, caught off balance, forced a smile, realizing she had sidestepped his trap without breaking composure. Melania leaned back slightly, tilting her head, as if waiting to see what he would try next. It was the first sign that she wasn't going to let him dictate the conversation, and from that moment the dynamic between them had begun to shift, and the audience knew it. Realizing that his initial attempt to frame her had failed, Dr. Holloway's demeanor shifted from amused to sharp, his smirk fading into a more serious, confrontational expression. He adjusted his jacket, leaning forward now, his elbows firmly on his knees, as though preparing to deliver the knockout punch. "Mrs. Trump," he said, his voice lower, more pointed, "you talk about kindness and quiet work, but let's not forget the broader context. You were part of an administration that many argue was divisive, even cruel." He paused, glancing toward the audience for validation before continuing. "Your Be Best campaign, let's be honest. Wasn't that a bit ironic? Preaching kindness and anti-bullying while standing beside someone known for inflammatory rhetoric? Some would say you were complicit by staying silent. What do you say to that?" The audience stirred, some murmuring, others waiting with bated breath for her response. Holloway sat back, folding his arms, convinced that he had finally cornered her, forcing her to either defend the indefensible or admit defeat. His words carried an unspoken message. You weren't just silent, you were part of it. The trap was set, and Holloway was sure she wouldn't escape. He looked at her expectantly, certain that this was the moment that would go viral, the clip where she would finally crack or stumble over a weak defense. But as he watched her, it was clear Melania wasn't rattled. Her gaze remained steady, her face calm, and though she didn't speak yet, something about her stillness made the audience shift uncomfortably, as if they could sense that the real answer was coming and it wasn't what Holloway had planned for. Melania took her time before answering, letting the weight of Holloway's accusations hang in the air. The audience waited, expecting perhaps a defensive reaction, a flustered attempt to explain, but when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, clear, and steady, every word deliberate. "You ask if I was complicit because I chose not to shout," she began, her eyes locked on Holloway. "But let me ask you something, Dr. Holloway. When did we decide that a woman's value is measured by how loudly she speaks?" A murmur rippled through the audience, some leaning in closer. "I did not shout, not because I had nothing to say," she continued, "but because I believe dignity, respect, and quiet strength are more powerful than noise. I have sat with children in hospitals, families who lost everything in disasters, and women who suffered abuse. I don't need cameras to know my work matters." She paused for just a breath, allowing her words to settle over the room. "You say I stood beside a man who was divisive," she added, tilting her head slightly. "But what about all of the women who have stood beside powerful men and still had their voices heard on their own terms? Did we question them in the same way? Or is it only when a woman does not behave as expected, when she does not perform for the cameras, that we dismiss her as irrelevant?" Her eyes never wavered from Holloway, who now sat a little stiffer in his chair. "I know who I am," she said, her tone soft but resolute. "I do not need to prove my worth to you or to anyone. And if being First Lady meant showing kindness and compassion behind closed doors, without shouting for applause, I am proud of that." The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of Melania's calm breathing. Then, as if realizing they had just witnessed something rare, the audience began to applaud, first in scattered claps, then growing louder and more unified. Holloway blinked, clearly caught off guard, as Melania sat back in her chair, her posture straight, her expression composed. She had answered, and she had won. As the applause slowly faded, Dr. Holloway shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confident posture from earlier now noticeably strained. His fingers fidgeted with the pen in his hand, and for the first time that evening, he didn't immediately have a response. The usual sharp retorts and smug smiles that had served him well in countless debates were nowhere to be found. Instead, he glanced nervously toward the audience, realizing the energy in the room had changed, and not in his favor. "Well, I mean," he stammered, trying to gather his thoughts. "Not saying you didn't do good work, Mrs. Trump. I'm just pointing out that, publicly, many people expected more visibility, perhaps." His attempt to soften his earlier attack fell flat, sounding weak and unconvincing compared to Melania's calm strength. Melanie simply watched him, her expression serene, almost as if she were waiting patiently for him to realize he had already lost control of the conversation. Holloway tried once more to steer the discussion, forcing a tight smile as he shuffled his notes, but it was clear to everyone watching, including the moderator and the live audience, that the narrative was no longer his to control. For a man used to dominating conversations, being left speechless was a rare and humbling sight, and Melania had done it without ever raising her voice. Melania Trump sat quietly for a moment, letting the tension settle before she spoke again. Her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable weight, a tone that made the room lean in to listen. "You know," she began, her gaze sweeping briefly over the audience before returning to Holloway, "for years people have tried to define me, to decide for themselves who I am and what I stand for. But I do not need to shout to know my value, and I certainly do not need to prove myself to those who refuse to see past their own expectations." There was a stillness in the room now, the kind that only comes when something real is being said, something that cuts through all the noise. "If I've learned anything," she continued, "it's that strength is not about how loud you are. It's about standing firm when people try to tear you down, and continuing to do what you believe is right, even when no one is watching." She paused, then added, "To all the young women here especially, know that you don't have to perform for approval. You don't need permission to be strong, and you never need to apologize for leading with quiet dignity." As Melania leaned back, folding her hands gently in her lap, the audience erupted into genuine applause, louder and more supportive than before. Even those who may have come expecting to see her falter were now on their feet, clapping. The moment was hers, powerful, graceful, and undeniable. And as Dr. Holloway sat silently beside her, glancing awkwardly at his notes, It was clear the conversation had ended on her terms. The fallout from the town hall was swift and overwhelming. Within minutes of the event ending, clips of Melania's calm yet devastating response to Dr. Holloway were circulating rapidly across social media. Hashtags like Melania Town Hall, Strength in Silence, and Melania vs. Holloway began trending on Twitter and TikTok. One clip captioned, "When you think you've set the trap but she flips it on you," showing the moment Holloway realized he had lost control, quickly racked up millions of views. Commentators across the political spectrum weighed in, with some praising Melania's composure as a masterclass in handling condescension, and others admitting they hadn't expected her to hold her ground so powerfully. Even typically critical outlets couldn't ignore what had happened, with headlines like "Melania Trump shuts down Holloway with poised response" and "Melania turns tables at town hall." Meanwhile, Holloway's own reputation took a hit. Though he made no public comment that night, online discourse was not kind. Memes flooded in showing before and after shots of his confidence crumbling mid-interview. Commentators noted that, for a man known for controlling interviews, being publicly outmaneuvered was a rare and damaging blow. Students who had been in the audience posted first-hand accounts, many expressing surprise at how Melania had completely reclaimed the narrative. By the next morning, news outlets were running highlight reels, and the town hall was no longer just a university event. It had become a national moment of reckoning about strength, gender, and public perception. The story of Melania Trump's calm and powerful response to Dr. Holloway teaches an important lesson about strength, composure, and self-respect. In a world that often rewards the loudest voices and expects women to perform to prove their worth, Melania reminded everyone that true power doesn't always need to be loud. She demonstrated that grace under pressure can dismantle even the sharpest attacks, and that confidence comes from knowing who you are, not from seeking validation. Rather than arguing or becoming defensive, Melania chose to respond with poise, turning Holloway's attempt to belittle her into an opportunity to highlight a deeper truth. Women do not need to conform to others' expectations to be strong or impactful. Her message resonated because it challenged a broader societal narrative that visibility and volume are the only measures of influence. Instead, she showed that quiet strength, dignity, and control can be even more powerful. This moment serves as a reminder to stand firm in your truth, to refuse to let others define you, and to understand that sometimes the most profound statement is made through calm, unwavering presence.